everyone, and welcome back to the Healthy, Wealthy, and Smart podcast right here on my YouTube channel. I am your host, Dr. Karen Litzy. And before we go on, don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and notification bell just so you don't miss 1 week of our new podcasts. All right, on to today's episode. This was a really great episode with award-winning entrepreneur and speaker Julie B talking about how to leverage burnout. So we hear so much about burnout these days, especially in the healthcare world. And today, Julie talks about her experience with extreme burnout. And I mean, really extreme, like going to the hospital extreme. How burnout affects business owners and how to document your burnout so that you can actually learn from it. Because there is actually a good side to burnout, even though you would never think that there would be, but there is. You'll hear about how to explore burnout leverage points, accepting the fact of burnout in order to prevent it from happening again. So a lot of great stuff on today's episode. And Julie's got a free gift called 30 Ways to Say No Guide, which I love because I used to always be a huge believer in say yes to everything. And now I'm a firm believer in only say yes to things that align with your mission, vision, and values, and that can help bring your career or yourself as a person forward. So you don't want to just say yes to everything, because saying yes to something could be saying no to something even bigger in the future. So I love that free gift. We'll have a link to it in the notes here right underneath this video. So if you are one of those people who says yes to anything and you are really looking at ways to say no, get this free gift. It's awesome. So a huge thanks to Julie B. And of course, thank you all for taking the time out of your day to watch this video and enjoy today's podcast. Hey, Julie, welcome to the podcast. I'm happy to have you on to talk about a very timely subject, and that is burnout. But I'm really excited to speak with you because you have a different take on it. We're going to be talking about leveraging burnout. So where did this come from? Where did your interest in talking about burnout come from?
Well, like most books and things, it usually comes from some type of personal story, right? So I've had a couple of experiences with burnout as a business owner, and in the summer of 2021, I had an epic burnout, the type of burnout where you go to the hospital, to the emergency room, and you think you're having a heart attack. I woke up that morning, there was a lot of stress going on, and I was in a leadership role, not only in my business, but in a volunteer organization. And I think I had 2 podcasts going at the time. I just had way too much on my plate. And I woke up and something very stressful happened. And my blood pressure was like 156 over 110. My pulse was like in the 140s.
Oh my.
Like chest pains, shortness of breath, kind of all of the things that you're like, okay, yeah, these are the signs of a heart attack in a woman, like nausea, like those types of things. So get in the car, go to the emergency room in the middle of when the Delta variant was amidst its chaotic breakout, and sat in the emergency room for eight hours, lots of cardiac workup tests. And basically the cardiologist said, listen, your heart's fine. You had a panic attack. Do less. That was, set me on my way with follow-ups. And that was it. That was it. And so, I took a couple of days off from work. I'm fortunate enough to have a team around me where I can do that unexpectedly. And I started though realizing, I had burned out, and talked to my therapist about it. And I started to do some research specifically for business owner burnout. And there was a lot of stuff out there about physician burnout and student burnout and corporate burnout. But when I Googled resources for business owners who are burned out, it would usually be like a 1-page article on Inc.com or on Fast Company that, had some relevant advice, but that was it. And a lot of it ended with take a vacation or take a break, which, if business owners, when they're stressed about their business or they're stressed about something in their business, they're not going to take a break very easily. They're not going to take a vacation, and let alone that you when you come back from vacation, the thing that caused burnout is still there. So yeah, like I started kind of documenting my own journey from recovering from that burnout. And I also started having conversations with more business owners about burnout. And I had people telling me things like their right arm didn't work for 2.5 years due to burnout. And there were just a lot of, it was just a lot of information. And that wasn't even the worst one, I don't think. And there's no resources. So I literally documented my process for getting through burnout and put it into a book. And now that book it'll be published in 2024. But I'm just trying to, my journey with burnout and what I'm doing now with burnout came out of my own personal experience and realizing there's a lack of resources for business owners and just wanting to provide something. Just, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a therapist, I'm not none of those things, but I am a business owner. I've been a business owner for 14 years and I've talked to hundreds of business owners. Almost all of them have a story about burnout. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to write a book and I'm going to start sharing this information. And yeah, that's the story of how I got into this topic very specifically for business owners.
And that always seems to be the way, right? It's like you have this personal experience. You can't find the tools or the resources to help you through it. So you kind of have to do it yourself almost.
Yeah.
Right. And now, did that cause stress and burnout though? Like as you're documenting, do you know what I mean? Because it's like, it's kind of like what, like on top of the next,
Yeah. Well, what's really funny is I had burned out before, and I kind of have this perspective for business owners that it's almost an inevitable bridge that we all cross at some point. And it might be true for every professional, and like we were talking before, I'm not trying to say business owner burnout is worse or, better than any other profession. It's just different. And what I realized is that I had done some of the things in the past, but I didn't have it all documented in one place. And so I was able to pull from some of my past experiences. Like I had a burnout once where I knew I was burned out. I just kept working and then I ended up having to have emergency surgery. Like that's something that business owners, I'm not the only one, definitely not the only one with that type of story. So I kind of went back. What I went back to was my past burnouts stories. And I kind of looked at how I got through those. And also, honestly, that helped me remember how resilient I am, which is something I think you need to get through burnout. And over that couple of weeks after I had been to the emergency room, I realized that, I had some things that I needed to get off my plate. And then I had some things that I still needed that were going to stay on my plate. And I had to approach work differently. So, ultimately you mentioned leveraging burnout. And what I tell people is that my leverage point from that burnout is the book that I wrote that's coming out, in 2024. So I think you just have to have, like, I had a different perspective. I know that any challenging time, I tend to come out of that with something bigger, better. Like there's always a positive change. It might suck the way that I got there, but there's usually something very positive that comes out of those challenges. So it didn't actually burn me out. Actually, I think I did take like 2 weeks off and unexpectedly, which is, for some business owners is really hard to do. But once I got kind of back on my feet from that, I was able to, make notes and write down the process and really, view it from the perspective of how can I take this experience to help other business owners? Because there's nothing out there. I looked for it, couldn't find anything specifically about business owners, and wanted to make a resource for it. And that's kind of how all of this brand and everything got started.
And so what can be good about burnout and the breakthroughs that come from it? Because most of the time we just think as burnout as bad, all around bad. So what can be good about it? And what kind of breakthroughs can come from it if we, let's say, embrace it versus try and like always pushing it away?
Yeah. So the good stuff from burnout, better priorities. Burnout forces you to really evaluate what is most important to you. And, looking at it from a big picture perspective, not just work and not just life. What I usually call this is work-life harmony. I think burnout forces you to find, personally, I think the term work-life balance is a little bit of BS, because balance means you're always kind of juggling, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the world that we live in, harmony is what we're really seeking. So things kind of flow together. Work might get a little bit more time sometimes, but life then, on the flip side, on the other side of that, life might get a little bit more time. That's one of probably the best things that comes out from burnout. Another great thing is you learn. I mean, you learn from the hard times. I think when we're having like an easy time in our lives, I don't think that we have the perspective of, some of us take that for granted. But when you are dealing with burnout, you really kind of see who, who you are as a person, but also like what mistakes you made and what to not repeat in the future, but also like what things did you learn about yourself that you can take into a future opportunity. um those are all kind of the good things that come out of burnout. I mean, there's so many. The biggest thing I think though is you usually have, most business owners that go through burnout experience this, but there's a couple of like aha moments or epiphanies or breakthroughs, and they come in various forms. I mean, some of them are, personal life breakthroughs, some of them are work breakthroughs, whether that's, I need to sell a business or start a business. Or one thing that often happens is people realize when they go through a really significant burnout like I did, one thing I realized was my core values had changed, and what I was doing no longer reflected my core value. I was working on an old set of core values. So I was making all of these decisions that were out of alignment with my core values. So there are these massive realizations that I think when you can kind of write down or, somehow document your experience of burnout, that when you get to the other side of it, there's so many potential learnings that come from it. I think that's the big thing, is that the priorities part is really a big thing. And then there's so many different levels of learning that you can get from a burnout, that if you just, you got to go through it. There's no going around it. I think you got to go through it. There's no hack to deal with burnout. That's something that I've been asked, is what's the hack? There isn't one. Like, we live in a instant gratification society. Everybody wants the
100%.
fast, right? Like, everybody wants the fast answer. But you
Yeah.
know what I've learned, I mean, sometimes a lot of the times you just have to do the work. Like, the big things come from big work. And that's the real, the stuff you see on Instagram, the stuff you see on social media. I personally am fascinated with social media. I've run a marketing agency for 14 years, but there's so much behind the scenes that you don't even know. And there's, anything worth, I think anything in life takes work. And that is when you go through burnout, when you work your way through burnout, I think that's also a lesson that you learn, is that when you get to the other side of something really hard, you realize how resilient you are, and how, for lack of better words, how powerful you are, like how much, and then you just know yourself better too. So there's so many good things that can come from burnout. So I usually tell people, I remind them of that, because when you're facing it, you're like, oh God, I just want to put my head in the sand until it's over. But it's not going to be over until you like address that head on. So that's kind of the deal with burnout, is that you have to address it. But if you do address it, you get to learn all these, really great things about yourself, about your business, and make changes as you need to.
And this is something that you'd mentioned a couple of times, and you said this word document a couple of times, documenting the burnout. So can you explain to the listeners how one would document their burnout phase?
Yeah. So, and I call this, I have a, what I call the I'm resilient folder. That's kind of what I call it. You can call it whatever you want to. You can call it your burnout folder, but basically you're going to write down what happened, when it happened. Um, and I really like people to write down kind of some of the thoughts they had, like while they were going through burnouts, the good thoughts and the horrible thoughts, like document those things, and literally can be in your iPad, it can be in a journal, just wherever you typically write things. I write things down, so I'm an old school kind of person. I have paper and pencil and all of that. But wherever you document things, do it with a voice recorder, but write down what happened, when it happened. And one thing I always like to tell people to document when they're documenting their burnout stories is, could ask yourself this question: could you have seen this coming, or did you see this coming? Because if you saw something coming and you weren't able to, if you just kept putting it off or didn't address it at the time, like that, sometimes that's a hard pill to swallow, but that's good to know, because then you'll be more aware. I think the next time you see something coming, you'll be like, man, I don't want to go down that road again, so I'm going to take care of this now. That's one question that I also like to ask. Again, some of their thoughts or what they were feeling. Like, some people don't love to write down their feelings about things, but thoughts will work in that place as well. And the reason and then what you learned specifically about that burnout, that's a really important one too. And what I like to do is that I suggest that people revisit that folder, that wherever they're keeping those documents, revisit it once a month, once a quarter. You don't have to read every single one of them. But have like one piece of paper for each burnout story, or even each, like, if you don't, some people really have a hard time admitting that they have been burned out, or they don't realize they've been burned out. So when I come across somebody who is kind of in that space, I say, okay, let's drop the word burnout. Let's talk about a time where you dreaded getting up in the morning, or you didn't want to go to work in the morning, or you just felt you were filled with this like sense of dread when you were facing something, or you were going through a really challenging time. You can also document those stories as well. And at the end of the day, when you open up that folder, that wherever you're storing all of that, and you kind of go back through your stories, you're like, man, I'm really very resilient and very relentless and very resourceful. You realize how resourceful you actually are, and how much you can actually handle. And it gives you it can help you prevent future burnouts. But when you're also facing a potential burnout, you've got evidence that you were successful at addressing burnout in the past. So you have evidence right in front of you. You don't have to go searching for that evidence. I also suggest people, it's kind of like when, getting a bank before you need a bank, having a banker before you need that relationship, or having a support network before you need it.
Right.
It's kind of like you have those stories documented in front of you that you can review. And it really does help you remember that, you have 100% success rate at getting through burnouts. So you got this one, you learned something. Look at all these great things you learned from all these past hard times. So look forward to it. Like, that's the silver lining in burnout, is if you can embrace it, you can say yes, and like, yes, I'm going through burnout, and I'm probably going to learn something great, and these are all the great things that happened from my last burnout. If you can get into that frame of mind, burnout isn't as scary, and something good is going to come from it, because you have proof that something good came from your past stories.
Yeah. I love that. And having that reference to look back on is so important. I didn't even think about it until you kept saying document. So that's why it was in my head.
Yeah.
I'm like, document? What do you mean document? But now that makes so much sense as a reference point to look back on and say, okay, this happened before, and maybe these are the steps that you took before, and they might actually work again.
Yeah.
Right. So you don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. Now, you also mentioned before, and we mentioned at the top of the show, leveraging burnout. So how do you know when you're at a leverage point of your burnout? And then how do you explore those leverage points?
Yeah. So you will know when you're actually ready to leverage burnout is once you've recovered from your burnout. So you kind of go through, you can't, it's hard to leverage burnout when you're burnt out, right? So you kind of got to go through, and I have a couple of steps. I really, for business owners specifically, I separate dealing with the crisis that burnout either caused, or, that sometimes burnout causes a challenge or a problem, and sometimes a problem causes burnout. So it just depends on what you're dealing with. So you got to deal with that first. Then you've got to recover from the burnout personally. And those are two separate things, like dealing with the problem that either caused or is caused by burnout, and actually personally recovering from the burnout. Two totally separate things. And I think that point is missed a lot about burnout. Once you get through that, once you feel steady and you're not, having panic attacks or, going to the emergency room, once you feel steady, then you can begin to leverage burnout. And what's interesting is when you begin to have a better, I think when people aren't afraid of burnout, when they're just like, okay, I'm burnt out, like this is more than stress, it's definitely burnout. When you can kind of take what I call the yes and approach. It's actually an old improv.
Yeah.
It's like one of the first rules of improv.
That's
Yes,
right.
and when you take that approach to it, you, as you're going through those steps, you start to see like, well, this, something may come up and you might be like, well, for example, for me, when I was going through burnout, I was looking for resources for business owner burnout. And I was noting like, there's no resources. Like it's literally one article on Inc. that says take a vacation, and it still hasn't changed a whole lot. So I was noting that. I was like making note of that as I was going through burnout and dealing with and like getting my sleep back on track and, resting and meditating and doing the things that I do, journaling, all the things that I do. You start to note the opportunities that you're seeing. And so what I tell people is just like keep track of those little like blips of hope that you have as you're going through them, because when you get to the other side, that's where you start to dive in and explore. So you might have like 3 or 4 of those like epiphanies or aha moments, or just like, it's interesting, there's no book about this type of moments, or there's no like real voice that's talking about this topic in this arena. And then you can start to explore that. So but to get there, you have to have that kind of yes and approach to it. And then, I kind of go through some examples of how to, make space. And I don't just mean, it's definitely not about making time on your calendar. That can be part of it. But sometimes making new physical space is really important too. Sometimes, and I have a lot of examples around that, but inevitably, like you had to make space to deal with your burnout. So whether that's you went to a gym to deal with burnout, or you went, you made some type of space to deal with burnout, and most likely some things you stop doing some things. I mean, you kind of stop doing some things when you're going through that. And so part of leveraging burnout is really evaluating, okay, I did not do this thing for a month and nobody seemed to miss it. Do I really need to do that? Do I need to continue doing that one thing? Or, and another example is I've had people who said, I used to work out 5 days a week, but I found that I get the same benefit if I just go 3 days a week, but maybe go an extra 10 minutes each day. So you just got like 2 workout days back to do something with. So that's what I'm talking about, like making space. It's not necessarily always just clearing time on the calendar. You then you use that space that you've made to explore like one of those ideas that came up during your burnout, like while you were going through that. So, to leverage burnout, you take that yes and approach, you kind of embrace it. You just say, listen, I'm burned out. I'm going through burnout. And you say that to yourself. You say that to, whoever you need to say that to. By doing that, instead of fighting it, you don't have the resistance of like fighting against burnout. That opens up like the ability to identify opportunities as you're going through your burnout, as you've recovered from your burnout. And then when you kind of get to the other side of it, you can explore some of those opportunities to find a potential leverage point for yourself. Some from a business owner perspective, some people have started businesses, some people have written books, some people have actually sold their businesses or closed their businesses to go back to work in the corporate America. I actually have a friend who did that. You just have to be aware that, of the opportunities that, just be on the lookout for them. I think that's really, really the idea. And if you take that yes and approach, if you take that, I'm embracing that I'm going through burnout instead of trying to fight against it, you'll be better able to see those opportunities.
Yeah. So you're sort of clearing space, like you said, not just on the calendar, but physical space and clearing that space around the burnout to allow the a new opportunity or an epiphany or an aha, like you said, to come in without being so just overly consumed.
Yeah, because you get and I don't know if you see this, Karen, in the PT world, but like in the business ownership world, it's some business owners really, they do not want to accept the fact that they're burned out. They do not even want to say the word burnout, because accepting that you're burnt out means that, at least to business owners who haven't kind of gone through this process, it means that you have to stop. They think it means you have to stop.
Or could it mean I'm a failure?
Oh yeah, easily. Like I'm a failure or I'm a phony. Imposter syndrome comes in big time. I mean, I've seen burnout cause imposter syndrome, and I've seen imposter syndrome cause burnout. So they're sometimes it goes both ways there. Yeah. So it's really, and you can't. There's this whole like fake it till you make it mindset in the business owner community as well, where, if you go to a networking event, you're like, yeah, everything's fine. Everything's fine. And I'm not saying go to a networking event and just like say, oh my God, business sucks right now. You don't like need to tell everybody that, but you need to be at least honest with yourself. So, I think the sooner that you can get over I think the sooner that we can accept that burnout is part of our world now, like it's not something that just happens to, it happens to everybody. I think everybody experiences burnout from time to time.
Yeah.
And I think if you accept that, instead of trying to fight against that, now I'm all about preventing, I think there are a lot of burnout you can prevent, but I think sometimes, I'll give you a perfect example of this. I just went through what I call acute burnout a few weeks ago. I'm here, like I'm the person who's writing about business owner burnout, right? I'm like this person who's trying to do it right. And my partner and I, my wife and I, we went to the beach. We went on vacation, planned vacation. It was great. And while we were at the beach, her mother passed away.
Yeah. That's tough.
I came back from the beach, coming back from vacation. Usually there's a lot of stuff that needs to, be done when you come back. I literally came back from the beach and I took like 3 weeks off unexpectedly to deal with all of the things that go into having a parent pass away. I was burned out. I said that to my key employee in our staff meeting. I was like, I'm dealing with acute burnout right now. Me saying that to her triggers like kind of a series of events, though, because we have a process set up. We know like you've got to start taking things off the calendar, or you've got to start like, Julie, you need to increase your meditation time, or, sleep, let yourself sleep in. Like there are these things that we kind of go through. Being able to tell her that, though, most business owners would never feel like they could tell their key person that. But what I try to stress with anybody really is that, and this, this is just, I don't know, like mental health or healthcare 101. If you're not taking care of yourself, who's going to take care of everybody else when you're not there? Like whether you're, hopefully it's just a temporary not there. But you have to take care of yourself. And so I think I listened to one of your previous podcasts and somebody was talking about their fiduciary responsibility. It's kind of the stewardship responsibility, I think, when you're a business owner. If you are a business owner, you are like we were talking about previously, you're responsible for several entities financially, often, obviously yourself and your business. Sometimes that even you feel that responsibility to employees, and sometimes even some of your clients, you feel that. And if you're not there to take care, if you're not taking care of yourself, who's going to take care of them?
Right.
So I think that, you have to, I really think the sooner we can accept that this is a thing that everybody deals with. Like, no, I don't think anybody is immune to burnout in the world that we live in. I
Yeah.
firmly believe that.
Yeah.
Um, there's too many demands, there's too much technology, there's too much like in your face 24/7. And even the best boundaries, even the best strategies sometimes do not work. I could not have anticipated that we were going to go on vacation and that my mother-in-law was going to die while we were on
Sure.
vacation. I mean, she was not well, but she had been not well for like 6 years. So I could not have anticipated that. And, you know, there was a point in time with the week that I got back that I just said, you know what, I can't work right now. Like, I had I can't work. Like, I had a parental figure in my life pass away.
Yeah.
And my wife was grieving and my family was grieving. And there's so much to do when you're dealing with that. I just, I did work some, but honestly, it was probably at most 5 hours a week.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
to keep some bare minimum things moving forward. You can't prepare for that. Like, there's no really good way to plan for something like that. And that's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about that sends, that can cause burnout, those acute things that happen. That nobody, even the most prepared individual is not going to be prepared to deal with vacation, then death, then busy season, like kind of all combined at once, which is what I was facing when I came back from the beach. And
Yeah.
it's, if you don't have a system to deal with actual burnout, not just preventing it, but like dealing with
Right.
it when it happens, it's going to be much harder to get through than if you just like say, I'm burned out, I need some time, I need some space, let's work the plan.
Yeah.
And then you do it.
Yeah. So you sort of have like some risk management around that
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
your business, which makes perfect sense. And now, as we begin to wrap things up here, what would you have, as per our conversation, what would you like the listeners to walk away with? What are the key points?
Well, geez, there's so many.
I know.
I would say, embrace burnout. Accept it as part of accept that it's probably going to happen to you at some point if it hasn't happened already. And the sooner you do that, the more opportunities that are going to come from those hard times. The other thing that I do want to say that I don't think we talked about, I think it's very important for people to have some measurable way of knowing what their baseline is and when they're approaching burnout, like what burnout looks like. So, quick example, number of hours you sleep every night.
That's
Have
great.
a baseline, and then know, like, for me, for example, I'm an 8-hour a night kind of sleeper.
Me too.
8 hours a night. A few nights in a particularly stressful week that I'm not getting that sleep, I pay attention to it. It's a blip. But if I go 2 weeks not getting 8 hours of sleep, I'm way closer to burnout than I am to my baseline. So knowing, like, there are measurable things that we can look at in our lives. So knowing what those things are for you specifically, whether it's sleep, whether it's exercise, whether it's eating, whatever those things, meditate. I mean, there's so many things. Whatever you do to take care of yourself, measure those things. Know what your normal is. And also know what burnout looks like for you on those scales. So that way you can catch it before you get all the way to burnout. And I think that's really how you prevent burnout. I think that's the secret to preventing it. When on the ones that you can prevent, that's kind of how you do it.
Yeah. Great advice.
Yeah.
And now the last question I ask everyone, and I gave you a little head start on this before we started, but knowing where you are now in your life and in your career, what advice would you give to your younger self? And you can pick an age.
Yeah. I would say probably 22. So right out of college. Schedule time to read and time to think at least once a week. Schedule and read as much as you can and give yourself thinking time every single week.
Oh, that is great. I don't think I've heard that one yet. That is a new one, but I love it. That's great advice. And now, where can people find you? Number one. Plus, I want to mention that you have a free gift for listeners, and I love this. Love it.
Yeah.
30 ways to say no guide. Amazing. And we will have a link to that in the show notes at podcast.healthywealthysmart.com.
Mhm.
So for people who want to know 30 ways to say no, you can go to the website, click on it, and sign up for that. I love it.
Mhm.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can find me at thejulieb.com. My last name is like a bumblebee, Bee. That is my real last name. So thejulieb.com. And actually, all of my social handles are some variation of that, thejulieb. So you can find me on all of the social channels. And you can go to the 30 Ways to Say No guide is also on our website and the resources tab. So you can find that there as well.
Perfect. Yes. I love a way to say no. I used to be a yes person, but now I'm a no person.
Yes.
I love it. So Julie, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, talking about burnout in a way that I don't think a lot of people are talking about burnout. So I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Karen. It's been great.
Yeah, pleasure. And everyone, thanks so much for listening. Have a great week and stay healthy, wealthy, and smart.